Hey everyone, and welcome to DualShockers. My name is Ryan Meitzler, and today we're bringing you another video discussion about two very similarly themed games, Gears Tactics and XCOM Chimera Squad. It's not very often that we get two sort of XCOM themed games coming out basically within a week of each other. So we're going to, me and my guest Chris Cornelise, he's here joining us, and we're going to talk about both of these games and sort of talk about which ones we think. Talk about the games and our reviews and sort of compare the two games. So, Chris, how are you doing today?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
I'm good, yeah. I think first off, since XCOM Chimera Squad is actually out right now on PC, Gears Tactics will be out next week, or by the time you're listening to this, it'll probably already be out. So I just want to start off first and have you sort of, since you reviewed XCOM Chimera Squad, just sort of introduce the game, what it's about, how it sort of ties into the XCOM series, and, just your thoughts since, you did the review for the game last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. XCOM Chimera Squad. Basically, it's a little surprise announcement from about a week before launch. They just said, hey, by the way, this is coming out, and here it is. And everyone was like, wait, this is an XCOM 3? And they're like, you're right, it isn't. It's very much a kind of spin-off. It's set 5 years after the events of XCOM 2, where the leftover aliens that are still stranded on Earth are trying to fit in with a new human society, and everyone's trying to balance it out, and there's all sorts of chaos and dissidence. So XCOM is now effectively a SWAT team. So you now have, rather than a whole bunch of random squaddies that you build up over time, you have set characters with set move sets that are effectively these special forces, and you have to investigate. Rather than covering the entire planet and saving it from alien menace, you are just policing a single city, trying to keep all the alien and human affairs running smoothly, basically.
Awesome, yeah. And then I guess just to quickly introduce sort of Gears Tactics. So basically, I'm doing the review for this game, and basically the sort of simple way to boil this game down is that it is basically Gears of War meets XCOM. Since the game basically plays more or less like an XCOM game, you have sort of the traditional style of gameplay from XCOM where you command a squad of characters, you have action points that you use to sort of determine what actions they take between attacking, defending, using Overwatch abilities, things like that. But then it layers in a bunch of elements from the Gears of War series into that. So you're using Gear soldiers to command a squad. You're fighting against the Locust. There's a bunch of different sort of gameplay mechanics that they use to sort of spice up the game from being just basically straight up XCOM. So I think one thing that I thought was interesting was just sort of how with XCOM Chimera Squad that you said is how this game sort of transitions from XCOM 2 and makes it's sort of a smaller scale experience. So I was just wondering, since obviously you're pretty well versed in the XCOM series, how did that work out for you? Did you think that was an interesting change? Did you like it or dislike it compared to other XCOM games?
Well, I think the crown jewel of the series is still going to be XCOM 2 War of the Chosen. But that said, Chimera Squad really did surprise me. There is a certain appeal to just, getting a bunch of rookies and seeing who dies, who does not, and then the ones that survive just get molded stronger. So Chimera Squad does away with that by having set characters and set movesets and stuff. So there's none of that. All of them have to live, and, losing any of them too badly will cause a game over. So it's like, oh, that's different. But nonetheless, they each have their own little character and charm, and I ended up really quite enjoying it quite a bit. So it wasn't too much lost, really. So ultimately, the mechanics and general moveset variety held up. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Gears Tactics actually has the exact same sort of system. Because basically with Gears Tactics, you have an assortment of sort of story-specific characters. So there's like Gabe Diaz, who's the father of Kate Diaz from Gears 5. And there's a couple other characters like that are crucial to the story, so they can't die at any point in the mission, where if they get killed, then you restart the mission over again.
Right.
On a mission, you usually have at least one or two of those characters, and then you have a couple of these gear soldiers that you recruit onto missions. Like, basically, as you progress in the story, you'll get to recruit new characters that you can, like in XCOM, you can completely customize them. They all have a different class and weapon. They have their own abilities, and then you can change how they look, what skills they have, things like that. Like pretty similar to what XCOM does. So that was interesting that XCOM also kind of took this approach, which is different from as far as I understand, different from the other games.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah, and I think just another thing too with XCOM with Chimera Squad is that I know you said that how this game kind of like was a surprise release, like it just kind of came out of nowhere. It's sort of like a budget price game, but it's still a pretty like hefty experience. You said it took you like 15-20 hours to finish this game, so I guess I was just wondering, like, did that surprise you that it's like such a robust, it feels like a full length sort of XCOM game, even though it's meant more as this sort of smaller standalone experience?
Yeah, I think it was. There was a decent amount of content overall. The mission length was pretty good. The overall campaign length, I thought, I definitely got the money's worth. So, and I think very few people would actually be disappointed in that regard. Biggest downside, I would say, on that front is the city management and the base management, which was kind of one of the key parts of XCOM 1 and 2, is a lot more downplayed here. So there's a lot less running around the map putting out fires, which I kind of enjoyed. So, yeah.
Nice, yeah, and I know like you're someone that is very familiar with the series. You played like all the previous games and everything. So I was just wondering, how does XCOM Chimera Squad feel like it stacks up compared to those games? Like, is it still just as challenging? Is it as demanding? Since I actually am not, like, I've only really played a little bit of Enemy Unknown, so I'm not as familiar with the series, but I know that they can be pretty brutally challenging. So how do you think that Chimera Squad stacks up sort of compared to the other games?
I think a lot of, for example, XCOM 2 will probably end up stacking up pretty harder compared to Chimera Squad, just because the difficulty in XCOM 2 is, avoiding a death spiral where one mission goes badly and then your best squad is wiped out, and so you're trying to maintain and quickly get your gear up and everything back up to that before time's up, and on higher difficulties that's nigh impossible. With Chimera Squad, you don't have that as much, and while you can there's definitely difficulty modifiers and such to make it a lot tougher, like enabling Iron Man and hardcore modes, I felt that for the most part your characters get strong enough quickly, and because this is a game over if you lose, it's a little more forgiving in that front. That said, there's definitely potential to be quite challenging, but it's just, I suppose, a different kind of challenge. It's all entirely in the battles and management and such.
Yeah, and I think, I guess now to sort of jump over to Gears Tactics a bit more, that's one of the things that I noticed I've been reviewing the game, is that even though, like, the basic framework of the game is very much, pretty similar to XCOM, like, in terms of how it plays, since they're taking, a third-person shooter and sort of adapting it into a strategy game, XCOM feels like it's a good sort of foundation to work with. But they've made actually some pretty, like, decently sized changes to make, I think, the game feel a little more faster paced and a little more accessible. So some of the big changes that they've implemented with Gears Tactics is that they've updated, so each unit in Gears Tactics in a level gets 3 actions per turn instead of 2. So you could basically, you could do a move, you could fire to a unit, and then you could either like reload or use an ability all in one turn. So I think it definitely has a drastic change sort of the pacing of the game, because, now that you sort of have, I know XCOM usually your units get 2 actions per turn. So I think it has a pretty like dynamic change to the flow of how combat works and everything, because now you have access to an extra action per turn.
More freedom to change up your strategy to just hoof it somewhere.
Right, yeah. And they do some pretty smart things too in this game that I like too, to sort of make it, like, even though it plays pretty much like an XCOM game, like if you played any of the previous XCOM games, Gear Tactics will feel pretty familiar. But I think they've layered in some nice touches from the Gear series to make it feel closer to Gears and like how it plays, even though it is in a different style of gameplay. Like in Gears Tactics, they have Overwatch from XCOM, so you can set units to sort of look out for incoming enemies and defend against them when they try to advance. Overwatch in this game, how it works is that you basically have like a cone that you drag out from your unit. So basically, you set them to Overwatch, you drag out the cone for which position they're going to look out from, and the cone also the cone basically infects what area they're going to look out for. So if you set the cone to be wider and more spread out, they'll be able to cover a larger area, but they'll have less accuracy and damage while doing it. Where if you keep it in sort of a tighter cone space, it'll be shorter, but they'll be able to do more damage and have more accuracy. So you'll have a better shot of being able to hit someone if they come in too. So I think, which is a pretty smart system.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. And another thing too is that they don't use a grid-based system like in XCOM. It's like freeform movement, so you just pick wherever you want on the map to move your unit. But then the action points are determined sort of like by the distance that they move during the thing. So I guess we just wanted to see if you had any other thoughts or questions about Gears Tactics and sort of how it compares to XCOM or I guess what it introduces from the Gear series into this sort of style of gameplay.
What I guess would be the biggest question is that since XCOM tends to be a fairly defensive game, like you do want to, you do want to stick to cover, you do want to. Sometimes it just boils down to no, I'm not moving. I'm setting everybody up in Overwatch and watching this.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas Gears is, as much as it is a cover shooter, it does encourage you to get in there to chainsaw an enemy, etc. So I figure, just in my mind, Gears comes across as more aggressive than a typical defensive kind of XCOM thing. So how does it translate? Does it feel more defensive, more aggressive? How do I have that?
Yeah, that was another one of the things too that I definitely felt while playing this is that it definitely, I think, takes more of that inspiration from Gears, where like it's meant to be sort of very action driven, where you're supposed to be very aggressive. Because generally I found whenever I've tried to like do sort of the hunker down, like play very defensively, I would just get wiped pretty quickly. I think part of that is because that they spawn a lot of enemies on you at a time in Gears Tactics. Like, basically there will be sort of I forget what they're called in Gears. They're like the big sort of spidery things that fly in the sky, and they'll drop off units onto the battlefield every, gradually or whatever. And, most of the time they'll spawn at least like 3 or 4 enemies at a time. So like a lot of times you'll be facing sometimes like 8 to 12 enemies at a time. So you'll be facing a lot of enemies. Like they can generally be taken out pretty easily if they're things like drones or the wretches, like the very like low level sort of enemies. And then they'll intersperse it with some higher level enemies like the boomers and things like that. But I think that's the thing, is that this game constantly sort of pushes you to the edge because you're constantly faced with. And then there's also things like the e-holes from Gears, which they'll pop up and they'll spawn even more enemies, so you want to try to close those right away, so that way you're not dealing with even more enemies. So I think this game definitely pushes you to be aggressive and constantly on the offensive, so that way you don't get overrun by the amount of enemies you'll be facing. They also do another thing too that I like a lot, where they incorporate executions from Gears, so you have all the gory sort of like Lancer kills and things like that from Gears. Which obviously are like, they're basically the animations from Gears 5, so they look pretty much exactly the same, but they look cool, in the context of the game. But they also bring another benefit, which is that if you execute an enemy in this game, it gives a bonus action to all of your other characters on your squad, which is a huge benefit. Yeah, so basically whenever you down an enemy, which is just you get their health down to a certain percentage, you pretty much always want to do an execution, because it'll always give all of your other teammates at least an extra action. Which is great, because I remember there was one time when like I had my sniper go and execute like 3 drones that I had downed, so all my other characters got like 3. They basically got a whole extra turn out of all of that, which was nuts.
It just lets you totally reposition and just advance, and I suppose there's plenty of potential to just keep chaining that, and I can definitely see it being more aggressive just by that alone.
Yeah, for sure. I think they definitely did a good job of sort of making this feel a little more fast-paced compared to those types of games, a little more aggressive. I think it's definitely, it may not be as sort of in-depth as XCOM is in terms of like just the actual strategy elements, but I think in terms of it being sort of closer to what people that play Gears might be expecting from this type of game, I think it definitely feels closer to Gears.
Well, that's good. Although a question on that front I have then is, a lot of the variety and strategy and complexity comes from, again, the base management, the outside aspects of XCOM. And that's a little less true in Chimera Squad, because it's a little bit stripped down and streamlined, but nonetheless there will be like researching new technology, equipping upgraded mods and things to your weapons, outside training and stuff. So my question is there what's the structure of Gears? Is it like just constantly mission to mission? Is it like a map that you progress over, the side quest, base management, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's basically just mission to mission. So basically, in between missions, you'll be taken to a screen where you can. There's a missions tab, so that'll basically show you what your next objective or level is, and there's divided up. So basically, it's divided into acts like Gears of War games. It's a pretty lengthy game. It's like about, I think, between like 20-30 hours at least. So it's a pretty long game. So you'll go to a screen where you see what your next mission is, and there are also opportunities where basically there's like some side missions you can do. So in order to progress to the sort of next main story mission, you'll have to do like 1 or 2 side missions to progress to them. So they're essentially story missions, but they give you sort of flexibility about which sort of one you want to take. Some of them are sort of like control point missions where you have to hold a spot, or you have to go retrieve an item, or there's missions where you have to like save gears that are captured and things like that. And then there's also a barracks where you can go in and customize all your characters. So you can recruit new soldiers, you can customize the ones you already have, change their equipment, their abilities, things like that. So yeah, I think it has from what I've seen, and especially from the screenshots that I saw in your review for XCOM, I think it has a pretty similar flow to that, where it's basically just sort of mission based, except there's not really like a map or anything like that. You're not like selecting which new area to go to. It just takes you to it just funnels you to the next mission.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to ask, I guess, about Gears Tactics, or any other questions or thoughts?
With all that said, what do you feel like the strengths, the weaknesses, the highlights, etc. of it? How would you rate it overall?
I'm finishing up the review today, but I'm going to be leaning towards an 8 for the game, for 8 out of 10. I think it's definitely a great blend of, the elements that work best in Gears of War and the elements that work best in XCOM. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most innovative, or, obviously, because it has so many similarities to XCOM that I think if you're looking for something that's like really deep or really unique, I don't think you're necessarily going to get that with this. But I think if you're a Gears fan and you're looking for sort of a different experience in that universe, I think Gears Tactics is a really, really good example of that. I think they did Splash Damage is the Coalition, which are the developers on this. They did a really great job sort of blending these two universes together and making it feel like a cohesive whole. And I think it's funny because it's like, Gears has been a cover shooter and like has been so known for that style of gameplay that it seems like obviously doing like a sort of tactics based squad game like that makes perfect sense. And I think they definitely nailed that with Gears Tactics.
Yeah, it definitely seemed from the footage and such I've seen that it does utilize the two very well. So I'm definitely interested in checking it out for myself.
For sure, yeah. And I think just sort of the last sort of question that I think I want us to answer is just sort of who do you think these games are for? Since obviously they are, both sort of they both play in sort of a similar style of gameplay and genre, and, obviously with the connection sort of XCOM between them, who do you think these games would appeal most to? So I think we'll start off with you since you're the XCOM expert here, so I think you'll know a little more than me.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously there are the XCOM fans who, to this day, are still playing the XCOM reboots and the Long War mods and such, which I mentioned. And yeah, I mean, I know for a fact that there's plenty of strategy games out there, but there's never anything quite like XCOM. So any kind of new release for Chimera Squad is different and as in a way iterative as it is, because it is again just modified XCOM 2 content by and large. I think there's definitely people who will be enjoying it from fans of the series and such. I'm not sure if it would reach that far outside that wheelhouse per se. Mm-hmm. Whereas by the looks of it, I think Gears Tactics is it would appeal to that kind of person, to that kind of group as well. Maybe a little less dense on the overall management sort of thing, but the strategy elements in battle are varied enough to give it to basically appeal to the strategy gamer. But I also think, just again, by the nature of it being a little more aggressive and obviously being attached to Gears, it may very well introduce it, and by extension XCOM, to other people who might not try it that much. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a great sort of approach to it. Is like, I think that XCOM Chimera Squad definitely seems like it's a good fit for people that are really like into that series and want sort of a more bite-sized, sort of accessible entry in it. And Gears Tactics, I think, definitely does a nice job sort of straddling the line between people that are, Gears of War fans that might want to try something that's a little different from the usual series. But also, I think it does a good job at appealing to people that like strategy games, even though I think if you're, I think you're probably going to come to it for the Gears of War connection. But I think it still does, it has like a really good set of features and a good set of gameplay additions to make it stand out from other tactics games, even though the sort of foundation of it is based so heavily on XCOM. And I think the thing too is that I think from when I played the game, like I said, I'm not someone that's really put a lot of time into the XCOM games, so I didn't go in being like, okay, I'm gonna play this on impossible with Iron Man and hardcore. Like, I did not do that at all. Like, I just played it on normal and just sort of get a feel for the experience and how the game is sort of meant to be played. But you can definitely tune this game to be as difficult or as accessible as you want it to be. I think there's five or six difficulty levels, and there is Iron Man, so that way if you do want to do sort of the no save, no restarting sort of mode, you can do that if you want. But I think also so you can make this game brutally difficult, I'm sure. And I haven't tried it on that difficulty, but I assume that it's probably as hard, if not more, as XCOM. But also I think that they do have an easy mode, so that way if you do want to go into this game and not necessarily worry about getting your ass handed to you, and you just want to enjoy the story and the universe, you can make this a little more accessible and easy. So I think Splash Damage and Coalition did a great job at making this game accessible for newcomers and people that might be casually interested in this, but also for the people that really want to give themselves a challenge, they can go in and get that from this.
Now, that kind of adaptability is always good, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, Ben Bayless on our team too is putting together an accessibility feature for this game, because this game actually also features a really good amount of accessibility features as far as supporting players who may have visual impairments or hearing impairments for this game, which is a nice treat too for so that this game can be accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah, that's good. That is one takeaway I had from Chimera Squad. Its features were not nearly as robust, and I think I gave Ben an aneurysm by sending him the screenshots.
Yeah, I sent him a bunch of screenshots of all like the in-game options and stuff, and he was like drowning in the amount of stuff, because you can there's different colorblind modes, there's all types of things where you can set the sensitivity on the mouse, so when you're like scrolling through different levels, there's a bunch of different things. There's in-game narration, so the game will be able to read all the text to you. You can change all the subtitle sizes. There's a lot there. So yeah, I think from my time with the game so far, I think I found that it's got a pretty robust feature set, and I think whether you're someone who's like really into strategy games or someone who's more casually interested but wants to play